Well, thanks for being with us here today on Palm Sunday. Today, we are wrapping up a series that we've been in for the past, this will be our third week. It's called Heartsick. Heartsick. And what we're doing really is looking at what's going on the inside. Now, the thing about this series, I mentioned this before, I'll say it again. The thing about this series that I find so exciting, like so appealing, is that really, it doesn't matter where you are on your faith journey. This is something that could be extremely, extremely helpful for you. Like whether you're just kind of checking things out or not sure if someone like twisted your arm and promised you lunch or whatever. Like either way, no matter what, this is something that could be really, really helpful for you. And basically what we've been looking at is this whole concept of like outside versus inside, right? So typically, when we have some kind of change that we want to make, right? Like maybe you want to make a New Year's resolution, or you want to improve in a certain area of life, or you want to grow, or whatever you want to do. Typically, for the most part, what we tend to do is focus on outside behaviors, right? We look at what people are doing on the outside. When we get frustrated with people, we get frustrated with their outside behaviors. When, if you're a parent and you have kids, typically we address and correct outside behaviors. But what we know now, like in the realm of psychology, but also what Jesus has been saying for like a pretty long time at this point, is that these things, like everything we are, everything we do, the good, the bad, the nice, the not nice, the things we're proud of, things we're ashamed of, it all comes from within. The way he said it was that it is from within, keyword here, within, out of a person's heart that evil thoughts come. Now this phrase here, evil thoughts, like it could be a little bit deceptive, but the whole idea is that there are like problematic ways of thinking within us, and out of the heart, they are set in motion. And so then he lists off like all these things that are outside behaviors. He talks about things like murder, things like theft, like all kinds of like sexual corruption, right? All this stuff that typically are outside behaviors, but it's like, no. All of this stuff actually starts in the heart, right? And so if that's true, then what he's saying really is that outside issues are caused by inside problems, right? Like problematic outside behaviors are coming from problematic ways of thinking within us. What he called, and actually what we still call, the heart. They come from the heart. To the people, like the ancient Jewish people, Jesus was an ancient Jewish person. In the Old Testament, New Testament, what we see is like the heart explained as the seat of what we believe, what we feel, and what we want. Our desires, our beliefs, our emotions, like it all sits in the heart, and that's where it comes from. And really this is what made Jesus so different from everybody else. Like everybody else, all the teachers back then, they were all like us talking about like behaviors, like do this, don't do this, try not to do this, and if you do this, like just give it your best effort and don't do that anymore. But Jesus was constantly talking about, no, let's talk about what's going on the inside. He's like, if you see somebody doing good, that came from good within them. If you see somebody doing bad, that came from the bad within them. And so really, it all comes from within. And so we looked at the words of a guy named Solomon, who's somebody that Jesus would have been reading these same words. And Solomon says, above all else, guard your heart. This word guard, it means like to give attention to. Keep it with all vigilance. Pay attention to what's going on the inside. Pay attention to your emotions. Pay attention to your beliefs. Pay attention to the things that are getting, like we say, under your skin, right? Pay attention to what's going on the inside, because everything you do on the outside flows from it. You are the kind of person you are. People know you as the way that they know you because of like what they see on the outside, but that comes from what's happening on the inside. And so over the past couple weeks, what we've been doing is like talking about, okay, well, what does this look like? Really, what is going on inside the heart, and how do we change it, and how does that affect us on the outside. So last week we talked about anger and what's going on in the heart with anger. And this week, we're talking about something else. And it's a little bit broader. Like we're going to kind of step back a little bit. And we're going to hear from a guy named James. Now, I like James. James, fun fact, if you didn't know this, James was the brother of Jesus. Jesus had a brother. And I don't know, like the first time I heard that, I was like, oh, pretty cool. Brother of Jesus, right? No, not cool. That would have been really rough. Like James pretty much loses from the start when your brother is Jesus. But think about it. So when I was growing up, I have a brother. He's 5 years younger than me. And he was like, okay, so in the beginning, I was the cool brother. But it was because I was 5 years older. You know, you kind of like, when you're 5 years older, you kind of have it in the bag. Like everything you do is cool to your younger brother. But then, like gradually, I kind of felt it like slipping away, you know. He started growing faster than I was growing. And eventually, like he surpassed me, got a lot taller. Then he started getting bigger. Then like his voice started getting really deep and he just like got cooler. Eventually, like when he's in high school, he starts looking at me like, you know, you're not as cool as I thought you were. Right? And it just kind of like slowly slipped away. Now he has a job and he's in the Secret Service. So I pretty much like thrown in the towel on the whole cool thing. But anyway, I like James. Why? Because James like never really had a chance. You know, you kind of feel bad for him. James could have done things that are really, really cool, but they're really never that cool. Like he could have been a fantastic cook, right? Amazing. But he can't turn water into wine, you know? Like maybe the story of James's birth was just like radical, you know? But it's not Christmas. You know, because he's James. He's not James Christ. He's just James. So James, right? Like, I like James. And he asked this question really that, I don't know if you've asked yourself or someone has asked you this question, maybe not in these exact words, but here's kind of how he pitches today's idea. He's writing to a church that's having some issues, and he says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Like, what's the problem? Why? Why are you fighting? When things aren't right in a relationship, why? When you've got issues at home, issues at work, issues with your friends, issues in your group, issues with your kids, issues with your parents, why? Like, what causes these things? Where do they come from? He says, don't they come from your desires that battle within? Remember that word? Within. He's saying like, what causes these outside problems? These outside issues are caused by inside problems. Like, hey, James, we heard that before, right? Where did we hear from? Jesus. James can't get credit for anything, right? These outside issues, he's saying, are caused by inside problems. And so I told you like we were taking a little bit of a step back from where we were last week. Last week we talked about anger, but this is included in anger. These desires, like the whole idea is that these issues, when you have an issue with somebody, what it comes down to is that you want something and they want something. Or that they have something that you want. Hold on, there's something in my throat. This is a problem. Okay, I think we got it under control. So he's like, really what it comes down to is that you want something. Like, I've got 2 kids. Let's say I put a piece of chocolate cake in the middle of them. They're going to argue about it, I promise. Why? Because one wants it and so does the other one. If only one can have it, they're going to argue. And if you think about it, if you really, really think about like the last time you had a big break in a relationship, or maybe things were going really well and all of a sudden they're not going well, or they're like your group of friends was great and all of a sudden it's not. What it really can come back to, if you stop and think about it, is that you wanted something, right? They wanted something. And the wants like weren't lining up. My I want like collided with your I want. And now we have a problem. Now there's an issue between us. And so what James says is now he gives like examples. He says, so here's what happens with these desires. He said, you desire, but do not have, so you kill. Now he might be speaking in hyperbole, like he might be exaggerating, but maybe not. Right? Like if you think about when people are killed, really, it comes back to something somebody wanted. You covet, which is another word for desire, right? But you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. Like these desires, they are drivers. Have you ever thought about like how huge of a role desire plays in our life? Like we are just desiring people. We're always desiring. You got out of bed this morning because you wanted to get out of bed, or you didn't want to stay in bed. You got dressed because you wanted to get up and get dressed. Or maybe you're home right now and you didn't want to get dressed, right? Everything you do because you want to. You're here right now because you wanted to be here. Or you wanted to make somebody happy who wanted you to be here, right? All of everything that we do comes back to desires. The most successful people in the world are the way that they are. The most motivated people in the world are the way that they are because of their desire. Michael Jordan became the way that he was because he had this desire, and it's his desire that drives him. Our desires drive us. They move us to action, and that can become a problem when those desires cause us to do things that create problems, right? Like James is saying, they cause us to kill. They cause us to slander. And maybe it's not like literally killing, but maybe it's killing a friendship. Maybe it's killing a relationship. Maybe it's killing someone's reputation. They cause us to do things. When my desire collides with your desire, we have a problem because desires drive us. Desires drive us. And so it creates all sorts of issues. And we've all heard of these stories, right? Like, I'm sure you've witnessed issues before where there was one side who wanted one thing and another side who wanted something else. And so it just ends up in like the erosion of the entire relationship, right? It's why, Uncle Billy can't be in the same room as Aunt Joan. Or why that friendship that was once a really great thing has now become, now we're uncomfortable when they even enter the room. Because of these deep-rooted desires. So what makes these desires so powerful? It's interesting. When we talk about desires, we tend to talk about like objects, like surface-level desires. But when James and when the other writers, like really all throughout Scripture, the Old Testament, New Testament, the writers, especially the writers in a book we call the Psalms, they talk about desires as things that live deep within the heart. In other words, what we want is often not ultimately what we want. It's almost like desires have layers, like onions. Desires have layers like onions have layers, right? So think about it like this. Let's say I have this desire right here, and the desire is for a cheeseburger, right? Do I want that cheeseburger? Well, yes, you could say that that's like my surface level desire, but really what I want is to eat, right? There's a deeper desire there. It's a desire to eat. And do I really just want to put food in my mouth and grind it up and then swallow? No, really what I want is to be full, right? And so beneath each desire is a deeper desire. And what's interesting is that once you meet a lower level desire, the rest of the desires just kind of go away, right? If there's a cheeseburger in front of me, but I've just eaten a steak, all of a sudden this thing that was once so appealing is no longer appealing because the lower level desire has been met. Desires live deep within us. And so if you think about maybe there's some promotion that you really want, right? Well, why? If someone's hey, you want to go up the ladder? You want a position of more influence? For the most part, a lot of people are yeah, absolutely. They wouldn't have to think about it. But really, why? Why? What's the desire? Is the desire just to be in that position? Well, maybe the desire beneath that is a desire for more influence, the ability to make a greater impact. Right? Or maybe the desire is for more money. And maybe you can go even deeper beneath that. Why is more money appealing? Well, because maybe then you don't have to worry so much if your car breaks down. Or maybe you can get a better car and it's an issue of status. But beneath each desire is another layer of desire. And as soon as you meet one, the ones on top, they just kind of go away. Desires have layers. And that in itself, just understanding, okay, why do I want this? Why do I want to date that person? Really, why? Honestly, what is it about that is appealing to me? just being able to unpack that, is extremely helpful for like life change, for understanding how we're working, like how the heart works. With kids like live at level 1. It's like they don't know there's anything beneath level 1. If I took a cheeseburger and put it between 2 of my kids, they're at 6 and 4, and they're always hungry. And if I like put it between them, I was like, hey, who gets the cheeseburger, right? Like we could try this right after the service. I'll show you. They'll argue about it, and then one will get it, and the other one will like break down like it's the end of the world, and it will never cross their mind that like, well, maybe you could just get something else to eat. Right? Like, because they won't go like one step low, like, well, what makes this cheeseburger appealing to me? But as we get older, we tend to be more aware of the layers, right? And the more aware of like what's going on in our heart that we are, the more like able we'll be to be able to make life change. So, desires. Those are like the cause of the issues that we have, but there's a catch, right? There's a little problem here. I heard a TED Talk not too long ago by a Harvard psychologist named Dan Gilbert. Really smart guy, a lot smarter than me. He talked about what we call the frontal lobe, right? Like it's part of your mind, and it's an experience simulator. So like if the example he used was Ben & Jerry's ice cream. He was like, would you want Ben & Jerry's ice cream if its flavor was liver and onions? Probably not. And it's not because you tried it and decided you don't like that. It's because you were able to simulate that experience in your mind. And that's like experience simulator is what determines what we actually want. And so he's like, okay, so here's a little test. And he said, would you rather win the lottery or become paraplegic? Like lose the ability to walk? And like everybody in the room right away is like, okay, haha, yeah, we get it. Like, we want to win the lottery. And he's like, but what's amazing is that there's actually data that shows that like after winning the lottery or after becoming paraplegic, like those two groups of people after just 1 year are equally happy. And so his point is like our experience simulators, what determines what we desire, it is remarkably inaccurate. Like we are way too confident when it comes to us predicting what will make us happy. And so our desires oftentimes are way off course. And so in James's letter, like he talks about this like first part like about desires, but there's this parallel passage. He's like kind of artsy and strategic in the way that he's writing. So he has 2 parts on desires that are not next to each other, but they're basically saying very similar things. And he unpacks this idea of desire. He says, okay, so like to talk about how inaccurate our desires are. He says, when you're tempted, right? Like when you think that there's like something in front of you that you want, but you know like, okay, really this is a compromise. Really I shouldn't do this. Really this is not something I would recommend that my kids do or someone I care about do, but like I'm tempted to. He says, when you're tempted, no one should say God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. Like this isn't God being like, go ahead, let's see what you do, right? He's like, but here's what's happening. Each person is tempted when they are dragged away and enticed by their own evil desire. This problematic, this corrupt, this destructive desire. That's what pulls us to like want to do things that are going to be damaging. He goes on. He says, then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Now, like in our culture, you say sin and people are like, ooh, like right away. Why? Because we hear sin and we imagine like, you know, God, big and powerful up there, like don't do that. And if you do that, I'm going to get angry. Like he's just trying to limit us, like stop us from having fun. So like we can't touch this, don't do that, don't be part of that, because you might have like too much fun here. But really, like this, I think in all of Scripture, this is the best depiction of sin. Like what he's saying here is that sin, there's actually like an image here that he's trying to paint, and it's a graphic image. He's saying you have this corrupt, this destructive desire, and so it like pulls you into compromise, sin. And where does that lead? It doesn't lead to God getting angry, but at least you got what you wanted. He's like, it leads to death. Like it leads to destruction. It leads to the death of relationships, the death of dreams, like it just destroys your life from the inside out. What he's saying is that like, if we're not careful, our desires, the things that causes like fights and quarrels among us, he's like, if we follow those things, you may think it's going to end up in you getting what you want, but you are going to be met with like intense pain and disappointment. And how many times have we seen this? How many times where it's like, well, I know like what God would want me to do, but like, just like you stay there and I'm going to go because I want to get what I want here. And then we get it and we're like, look back and we're like, well, that wasn't worth it. Right? And what James is saying is like, you will pay an extremely high price. When your desires cause you to compromise, you're going to end up paying an extremely high price and never even receive what you wanted to begin with. It gives birth to death. It doesn't give birth to you getting what you wanted. There's an image there. I said it's a graphic image. These words here, give birth to death. It's a picture of a stillborn baby. He's saying like, it starts with all this excitement. Like you're going to have a family, you're going to have kids. This is going to be like a home, like all that. Like they didn't have the medicine and technology. So when you were pregnant, there was a big thing here that wasn't there before. And that means that something good is coming. But he's like, so there's all this anticipation only to like end in heartbreak. And he's like, that's what happens when you let your desires get away from you. Like, it's one thing if your desires are, if you want a new pair of shoes or like a new scooter. That was, for me, I wanted like a motor scooter when I was younger. And so like, that's like the thing you got to get, right? And you go after, and then you get it. And what happens? You're like, okay, well, now I want a faster one, right? Or you want something else. Like, just think about it. Has there ever been a time when you're like, I want that. I need that. Like for me, when I was growing up, it was like, I'm in elementary school. I was like, oh, I just can't wait till I get to middle school. Then I don't have to be in lines anymore, And then I get to middle school and it's like, oh, I got to get to high school because then whatever, there's good stuff in high school, I guess. And I'll have like a locker and whatever. And then you get in high school and you're like, oh, just when I get to college, I don't have to deal with this high school drama. And then you get to college and you're like, yeah, I can't wait to get through this so I can start working on my master's degree or get a job. And then like, it's like, well, one day I'll get married and I'll start a family. And it's like, we're always looking to the next thing. And that's like, to an extent, that's natural and that's okay. But when it causes you to compromise, to go someplace where you shouldn't, it's going to come back to hurt. And so what James is saying is like, we need to be aware of just how deceptively like wrong our desires are, because we may end up paying an extremely high price for something we never receive. Like we've all heard the stories. Maybe you've done it yourself of like somebody who abandons their family to go like chase after some whatever, right? And then I imagine it's a painful day when they wake up and are like, now I don't have them anymore. For what? Right? Or maybe like you, at one point, maybe you had a set of standards where you're like, this is the kind of person I want to live. This is the way I want to live. These are my values. This is what matters to me. And then, but there was this opportunity. You're like, well, and so like, right? And then eventually you get to a place where you find yourself, and maybe your loved ones are telling you like, you've changed. You are paying an extremely high price and you may not even get what it was you think you wanted because desires are deceptive. Jim Carrey, right? Jim Carrey, he's rich and famous, which is what most people in our generation at least want. They want money and they want fame. He was quoted saying, I wish everybody could get everything they want and become rich and famous just so that they'll see it won't satisfy them. If there's something you really want, go find somebody who has what you want and ask them, be like, did this do it for you? And what you'll find is that it doesn't. It's an empty promise. And so if you're somebody who like has no interest in God, right? You're like, no, don't buy it. Not interested. Don't care. I think that could help you. The whole idea that like our desires, sometimes we think we want the cheeseburger, but really there's a hunger underneath that can be satisfied by something else. Like the fact that our desires have layers, and if we're not careful, we could end up paying a really high price for something and never actually receive it, because desires are deceptive. I think that could be helpful for you. But if you're open to the fact that there is a God who's real, who knows you by name, who cares about you and wants what's best for you, I think like this is where like everything can change. You see, one of the biggest like misconceptions about Christianity, about Jesus, about God, and even like what makes Jesus so different from so many other religions is that like a lot of people think that we're supposed to like neglect, forget, reject, suppress our desires and be like, I really want this, but like, no, God says, no, I can't have that because it'll bring me joy, right? And so we like push it away. But what Jesus explained over and over and over and over again is that like, we're not supposed to, the problem is not that we have these desires. The problem is that we are trying to meet them in the wrong places. There's this guy who's a prophet, like way before Jesus. And in the prophet Jeremiah, he says like, God has offered us like fountains of living water. Like a fountain, like water that never runs out. And back then, like for us, we're like, no thanks, we got sinks. For them, it wasn't like that, right? Like water was not an easy thing to come by. And God's like, I'm offering you fountains of living water. And instead, you have chosen for yourself cracked cisterns. Like these basically vessels that hold water. He's like, you're choosing cracked vessels when I'm offering you something that will really satisfy you. When Jesus explained himself to people, he was like, there is a deep hunger within you, right? We all know it. We all have it. It's why we're like such desiring creatures. He's like, if that like feeling, that dissatisfaction, if that's a hunger, well, then I am the bread to that hunger. It's like, all right, fine. You want to call it like thirst. Let's call it thirst. Well, I am the living water that will like forever quench your thirst. You want to call it darkness? Okay, well, then I am the light to that darkness. You want to call it fatigue or weariness? He's like, well, then I am the rest that your soul is looking for. He's like, you have these strong, strong desires, and I am the answer to that desire. And so when James is wrapping up his whole explanation of like where desires lead, like here's how he closes it. He says, do not be deceived. Do not be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. He says, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. Like, in other words, like you're going to have, remember, he was just talking about desires. You're going to have moments where you have like your desire is like, I should go get that, and just tell God to just wait right there. Well, I go get that, right? Because he's probably holding out, and he's like, no, don't like trick yourself into thinking that God doesn't want what's best for you. He cares for you, and he knows where this road leads. He knows there will be a day when you look back and you're like, well, that wasn't worth it. That was not a stop on the bus I thought I was on, right? Like it didn't actually end up taking me to where I want. And so in those moments when we want something and we're tempted to like compromise and change our lifestyles and do things we know we shouldn't do and wouldn't tell our kids to do or our loved ones to do, what James is saying is like, don't be deceived in those moments. Remind yourself that everything good you have comes from God. When we think about God, we typically like look at him as the one who's limiting us, who's trying to take away the good things from us. And he's like, no, think about the things you enjoy, the things that make life worth living, those moments that are priceless, those relationships that you wouldn't give up for anything, the bond of love that you feel with your loved ones. Like those things, understand God as the source of those things, because he wants that for you. He cares for you. Like if you're a parent, how you would want that for your kids. Instead, we like look at him as like the one who's like always telling us like what we shouldn't do because he's trying to stop us from having fun. And so James's solution, like what he tells people to do, he's like, okay, and again, bouncing back and forth between these two passages, but they're parallels. He says, so here's what you do. Here's what you do. He says, you do not have because you do not ask. He's saying, take what you want, whatever the desire is, good, bad, right, wrong, whatever the desire is, and bring it to him. Like, tell him about it. And then he goes on, he says, and when you ask, you do not receive, because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. Now, like, in our like anti-God state of mind, we're like, see, there it is. He's trying to stop me from having fun. Right? Doesn't want me to like enjoy anything. But no, this word here for pleasures is the same exact word that James uses when he says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Is it not your desires? This is actually the word for desires. He's bringing it full circle. He's saying there is a time when God will say no, but he will do it because that's what got you into the mess to begin with. Like, he is not going to give you something that's going to like continue this cycle of destruction that you're like living through. He's only going to give you the things that will ultimately end up in your good. There's a time that he will say no, but that will be a gift. That's a good thing. So like think about it like this. Like this is kind of a weird example. I was debating whether or not to talk about it, but I did in the first service and they seemed to understand. So imagine my daughter is outside, right? And I see her fighting with my neighbor and they're fighting over a bag of mulch, right? Because that's what 6-year-olds fight over. I told you this was a little far-fetched. Right? And they're fighting over a bag of mulch. And then finally she takes James's advice and she's like, all right, I'm going to stop fighting and quarreling and I'm going to go to my father, right? In this case, in this example, I'm God. So it's getting better. She comes inside the house and she says, like, brings it to me. She asks and she says, I want that bag of mulch. And then she like unpacks the desire before me. I want it because, goes down to the next layer. Why do I want it? Because I'm hungry. Like in that moment, how horrible of a father would I be if I said, okay, here, have a bag of mulch. No, I would look at her and I would say, trust me, you don't want that. I have something better for you. And so like I said before, Jesus said over and over again, I am the answer to the deep hunger that you have within you. In the book of Psalms, the writer says, delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. Those deep-rooted desires, he will meet those desires. And at the risk of like getting too abstract, I'll leave you with this story. So a good friend of mine shared with me that he had an issue when he was in high school dating girls. He always had to have a girl on his arm. And so he was constantly in this position where he was like, all right, maybe I'll date her. I know it's probably not good for me, but I want to date, because he always wanted to be with somebody. And when he would get dumped, it was like the world was ending because he wanted so badly to be with somebody. And so what he did was take that desire. He followed James's advice. He took that desire to God and started praying about it, which seemed a little bit weird, but he was open with him. He was honest with him. Why? Because God knew anyway what he wanted, and so he wasn't going to hide it. And he said, like, I want to be with this girl who had just dumped him. I want her. That's like his cheeseburger, right? That's the thing that he wanted. And then he started to unpack his desires. And he said, like, as he's explaining this to me, he said, you know what I realized? I realized that what I really wanted, like the hunger beneath the cheeseburger, was that I just wanted to be wanted. Like that was the desire of my heart. And he said, when I took that to God, what I realized for the first time in a real way was that Jesus going to the cross for me was the ultimate expression of him showing me that he wanted me. Now, like, how much worse would it have been if God was like, fine, you want that girl? Go ahead, here, right? And you just continue that, like, cycle of heartbreak, of compromise, sacrifice, heartbreak. You just keep doing that here, and I'm God, and I'll give you. But instead, he said, no, trust me, I have something better for you. And now the guy's married, he's got kids. It's not like he'd never wanted to be with a girl again. But all of a sudden, that desire was put in its right place. And now he could like make a clear-headed decision because there wasn't this deep like dissatisfaction that was driving him. And so my question for you today is like, what is it that you want? What are the things that are like pushing you to compromise? The things that are like have you fighting and quarreling, the things that like there's no way you'd give those things up because they are these deep driving desires. What if you brought them to God? And what if you told him like, hey, here's what I want. Like, I want this promotion, right? I want money. Just tell him, like, I want more money. And maybe he'll give it to you. Maybe he will. Or maybe he'll like stop and be like, no, trust me. You don't want that. Like if your pursuit of a promotion is just so that you feel like you're worth something, like once you get that, you're not gonna feel like you're worth something. And so the pursuit is gonna continue, and I love you too much to let you continue that cycle. But maybe instead of that, he'll show you that you are worth everything to him. And like there won't be such a need to feel significant. Or maybe like you're asking him for money, right? And like there's this constant fear. Like I'm just not gonna have enough, I'm not gonna have enough, I'm not gonna have enough. And maybe sometimes he will give you money, and maybe he won't. And maybe instead he'll like stop you and be like, no, you're not gonna be rich, but I promise to provide for you. And instead he offers you like peace of mind and of heart. Like maybe there are things right now that are causing issues, fights, quarrels in our lives, deep, deep desires. And maybe if we would bring them to God, maybe he would give them to us. Or maybe he would give us something that is so much better. Because every good and every perfect gift comes from above, from the Father who loves us. Let's pray together. God, you are so good. You are so good. And I know, even myself personally, God, I am constantly questioning whether you're holding out on us. Like if I need to press pause and just like put you aside and go fight my own fights and go after my own desires. But God, I pray for all of us here that in those moments when our desires will like tempt us and cause us to compromise, God, I pray that you would remind us not to be deceived, that you are the source of all things that are good, that you care for us like a father cares for his children, and that we can trust you with the yeses and the nos. So God, let that sink deep into our hearts. Allow it to change us, to put our desires in the right place, and to change our relationships. In Jesus' name we pray.